Jesus came in a time no one was expecting a spiritual leader but a warrior king Messiah. They need a fighter king, who will make them free. In fact, the definition of Messiah is also related to kingship rather than spirituality. This could be one of the reasons why Jews opposed Jesus. They were not in any demand or hope of a figure like that. By 107 BC, Gaius Marius was consul of Rome. The Senate found its own champion in Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who eventually deposed Marius and became dictator in 82 BC. A horrifying reign of terror ensued until the Democrat statesman and general Gaius Julius Caesar gained popularity and was duly elected to primary office in 63 BC. In that same year, Roman legions marched into the Holy Land, which was already in a state of sectarian turmoil. The Pharisees, who observed the rather strict ancient Jewish laws, had risen in protest against the more liberal Greek culture. In so doing, they also opposed the priestly caste of Sadducees. The unsettled environment rendered the region ripe for invasion. Seeing their opportunity, the Romans, under Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, subjugated Judea and seized Jerusalem, having annexed Syria and the rest of Palestine. Meanwhile, the Roman hierarchy was undergoing its own upheavals. Julius Caesar, Pompey and Crassus formed the first ruling triumvirate in Rome, but their joint administration floundered when Caesar was sent to Gaul, and Crassus went to supervise matters in Jerusalem. In their absence, Pompey changed political camps, deserting the Democrats for the Republican aristocrats, whereupon Caesar returned, and civil war ensued. Caesar was victorious at Pharsalus, in Greece, and gained full control of the imperial provinces when Pompey fled to Egypt. Until that time, Queen Cleopatra VII had been ruling Egypt jointly with her brother, Ptolemy XIII. But then Caesar visited Alexandria and liaised with Cleopatra, who had her brother assassinated, and began to rule in her own right. Caesar went on to campaign in Asia Minor and North Africa, but on his return to Rome in 44 BC he was murdered by republicans on the Ides of March. His nephew Gaius Octavius, Octavian, formed a second triumvirate with General Mark Antony, and the statesman Marcus Lepidus. Octavian and Mark Antony defeated the foremost of Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, at Philippi in Macedonia, but Antony then deserted his wife Octavia, Octavian's sister, to join Cleopatra. At this, Octavian declared war on Egypt, and was victorious at the Battle of Actium, following which Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. Palestine at this juncture comprised three distinct provinces: Galilee in the north, Judea in the south, and Samaria in between. Julius Caesar had installed the Idumean Antipater as procurator of Judea, with his son Herod as the governor of Galilee. Antipater was killed shortly afterward, so Herod was summoned to Rome and there appointed king of Judea. To the majority of his subjects, Herod was an Arab usurper. He had converted to a form of Judaism, but he was not of the Davidic succession. In practice, Herod's authority was confined to Galilee. Judea was actually governed by the Roman procurator at Caesarea. Between the two of them, the regime was harsh in the extreme, and more than 3,000 summary crucifixions were carried out to coerce the population into submission. Prohibitive taxes were levied, torture was commonplace, and the Jewish suicide rate leapt alarmingly. This was the brutal environment into which Jesus was born, a climate of oppression controlled by a puppet monarchy backed by a highly organized military occupational force. The Jews were desperate for their long-awaited Messiah, anointed one, from the Hebrew mazak to anoint, but there was no thought of this Messiah being divine. What the people wanted was a forceful liberator to secure their freedom from the Roman overlords. Among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, the text known as the War Rule sets out a strategy for the ultimate battle, naming the Messiah as the supreme military commander of Israel. Qumran community. The uprising in 168 BC in which the Maccabees came to prominence was prompted largely by the action of King Antiochus IV Epiphanes of Syria, who foisted a system of Greek worship upon the Jewish community. The Maccabees later reconsecrated the temple but, successful as the Jews were against Antiochus, internal social damage had been done because the campaign had necessitated fighting on the Sabbath. A core of ultra-strict Jewish devotees known as the Hasidim, pious ones, strongly objected to this, and when the triumphant house of Maccabeus took control and set up their own king and high priest in Jerusalem, the Hasidim not only voiced their opposition but marched en masse out of the city, in order to establish their own pure community in the nearby Wilderness of Qumran. Building work started in around 130 BC. This community is the source of all esoteric organizations even today.